first time we've done them online like this. So welcome. And at Environment Canterbury, we open our meetings with a karakia. So I'll just ask Councillor Pauling to open this day's session for us. Thank you very much, Councillor Pauling.
Ai, kia ora koutou, ka nui te mihi ki a koutou I tēnei ata. Ki ngā manuhiri, ko tai mai ki tēnei hui, tēnā koutou. So kia ora koutou, sorry I haven't got my camera on because my Wi-Fi competes with my teenagers at my house, so just keep it on the audio. So it's great to have everyone here this morning. I'll just start with karakia to get us underway and look forward to hearing from our first submitters. Whakatake te hau ki te uru, whakatake te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kine kine ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hi aki ana te atakura, he teo, he hoka, he hauhu, a tihai mauri ora. Kia ora koutou.
Thank you, Councillor Pauling. As you can see, there's sometimes a little delay because we're all trying to keep our mics off to stop feedback happening. So our first submitters are the Federated Farmers Organisation, and we have with us today Lionel Hume and Jason Grant. So if you just say who you are at the start, please, I think that's going to help us. So over to the two of you. Thank you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Jason Grant. Can you hear me okay? Because my screen is just frozen up, and I'm just hoping you still hear me okay. Is that all right?
I can hear you very well. We have a chat line, so if anybody can't hear, they should just chat and tell us. You keep going. Thanks.
I might even just turn my camera off to stop any confusion.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah, hopefully that's better. Yeah, So I'm Jason Grant. I'm provincial president for South Canterbury Federated Farmers. I'm also chair of the regional policy committee for Federated Farmers. I'm just I've just got a few points here on the annual plan. Just like thanks for the opportunity to speak to our submission. So, just in light of the current economic climate, I suppose we'd like to see the regional council cut costs as much as possible and defer any rate increases where possible. I think the reason for that's just with the economy the way it's heading and a lot of unknowns. We've just got to remember that a lot of the rate payers won't even be able to afford to pay their rates, let alone any rate increases. So that's a bit of a concern to us. Also, too, when it comes to compliance pressure, the needs reflect the times. So it's just if people, around compliance, I mean, obviously we don't want people to become completely non-compliant and do things they shouldn't. It's just a reflection of economic stress that some farms will be under, and take that into consideration when around compliance. And also to any projects, and it relates to the budgets, where any projects that don't relate directly to the council's mandate, we'd like to see shelved, and just to have the council stick to.
Oh, goodness me. He seems to have disappeared, Graham. Are you still there, Lionel?
I think he's just muted himself, maybe.
Could someone send him a message then? Can you send him a message, Craig?
Yep, I'll try.
Good on you.
There's no muted microphone next to his name, so he hasn't muted himself. It's just his connect.
I think he's just disappeared. What about you? Are you online, Lionel? What about you, Jason? Are you online?
Jenny, Lionel was muted a moment ago, so he might not.
Someone send Lionel a message then too, please.
Yeah, no, I'm right now. I'm not quite sure how I got muted. I certainly didn't deliberately do so.
Well, it seems like we've got a few problems, so if you'd like to speak, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. And hopefully Jason might get back to us. I think he was partway through saying that, yeah, council should stick to projects that it's got a direct mandate for, and then perhaps look at shelving any that are sort of, I guess, more on the fringe of its mandate. I think that was the point he was partway through making, and I suspect that might have been, yeah, one of the final things he was going to say. So I can...
Sorry about that.
Oh.
Sorry, I did come back. Sorry about that glitch there. Just one final point. Yeah, it's just farming is one of the, farming as being one of the big ratepayers for the council, is looking to come out of this pandemic crisis in better shape than a lot of other industries. That may be so, but however, we do expect a lot of the commodity price to soften and demand for our higher value products to drop off considerably, and this will severely affect the profitability of our industry. I suppose the global dairy trade auction this morning is a bit of an example of that, dropping 4.2%. So I mean, that's all. Sorry to jump back in there, but yeah, as I was reflecting. Sorry, Lionel, you carry on.
Yeah, I've just got one or two brief points I'd like to make, mostly to do with the freshwater management portfolio. Firstly, I'd like to emphasise the importance of basing water planning and decision making on good governance. And this applies to the committees, the council itself, as well as farmers and irrigators. We submitted on this quite strongly at last year's annual plan, and we were glad to see the water data management project arise after that, and we obviously strongly support that. Under the heading Challenges and our strategic focus, reference is made to the challenges of degraded water quality and the effects of water abstraction and climate on water flows. I'd like to emphasise that Canterbury is really in an excellent position to respond to these challenges by developing water infrastructure and storage. Given the climate change scenario that we're looking at for Canterbury, we're in an ideal position to build our resilience to climate change by developing such infrastructure. And by doing so, we're in the position where we can ensure reliable water supplies for both rural and urban supply, and also support environmental flows. In the section entitled Canterbury Water Management Strategy Facilitation, there's a question: what do you think are the most pressing issues for fresh water in your local area? Two issues for farmers, for both locally and regionally: the decreasing reliability of water supplies and the required reductions in nitrogen discharge. And both of these arise from limit setting processes alongside the development of sub-regional plans. In that context, we referred to the CWMS pointing out that it has specific targets in relation to water supply and infrastructure development, alongside the more environmental targets. Water management strategy contains a principle of parallel development, which states that a total solution is required, and that a balanced program of parallel development is required. So in response to the question on page 16 of the draft plan about the future focus of the 10 zone committees, we believe that the zone committees should strive to honour the principle of parallel development in the Canterbury Water Management Strategy, and strive to achieve the goals in the 10 target areas. The next thing I'd like to briefly comment on is in the climate change, hazards, risks and resilience portfolio, and really flows on from the other comments. In answer to the question on page 33 of the draft plan, what do you think the community should do in response to climate change? Federated Farmers believes that the community should build its resilience to the impact of climate change using the resources that we're blessed with as a province, really, by developing and building community scale water infrastructure consistent with the Canterbury Water Management Strategy targets. And that's it. Yeah, that's it from me. Those are things I want to emphasise.
Oh, thank you very much, Lionel. Now I'll just invite councillors. Are there any questions?
Hi, Jenny. Councillor Mackay has a question.
Yes, Councillor Mackay.
Thank you, Jenny. Good morning, Lionel. Good morning, Jason. Just wanted to really pick up, Lionel, on your point 30, the challenges and the strategic focus, and your talk about resilience. And of course, the suggestion you've made there around community scale water storage, it covers a lot of our portfolios and a lot of the issues that our community wants to see addressed. Community supplies, perhaps not so much in Canterbury this year, but certainly in other regions has come under a great stress this year. And certainly we've seen environmental flows in our rivers being impacted. The question I just want to ask is, do you think that we're at the point now that the wider community actually could support some sort of community storage project which had benefits, wide benefits for a lot of the areas that we actually work in?
Yeah, I believe so. I certainly hope so. And we're increasingly getting into a situation. Well, we're getting into a situation where it's becoming more obvious that we need to do that, I think, with Canterbury's climate change scenario, particularly. We're getting drier on the east coast. Rainfall is, if anything, going to increase on the west coast and therefore in the main divide. So the projection is we'll get greater flows on average in the alpine rivers, albeit probably less reliable flows. So that greater amount of water but less reliable supply, to me, obviously points to the need to develop our infrastructure, including storage and increase reliability of supply for both farmers and urban folk. And I think people seem to think that water storage and farmers using water and irrigation and stuff is somehow competitive with environmental goals that we quite rightly have. I don't think that's true. Reliable water supply enables people to use water effectively and efficiently, and also leads to greater diversity of land use. If someone's contemplating growing specialist arable or horticultural crops, they're very dependent on a reliable water supply. They can lose a large chunk of their income if they miss an irrigation. So if we believe in responsible management of water, efficient management of water, the ability to invest in the sort of infrastructure that enables farmers to apply water efficiently, then we really need to go down this track. If we want water to be used more efficiently, we need to provide reliable water, essentially, so that people know that when they need to irrigate, it's going to be there, so they don't get into use it or lose it sort of mentality.
Oh, thank you very much, Lionel. Did you have another question, Claire, or was that all?
No, I mean, my comment really is I think that we've come to a situation, certainly over the last probably 10 years, where the community has seen storage as being for irrigation purposes and particularly intensification of dairy. And I mean, we know that when we look at the figures of irrigated land use, that is not true. But it's my point is, do we think the wider community is at the stage now where they are prepared to step up and actually fund some of the storage cost to provide for water security in the future for community needs and environmental flows as well? And that is, to date, always been a roadblock as I perceive it.
All right. Well, thank you, Councillor. I just should have made a comment at the start. I think we're going to have to manage this a little bit, otherwise we're going to get too far behind with the time. So if councillors could just have a few words of comment at the start and then their question, please, that would be great. Now, Louise, I see the next person wishing to speak is Councillor Liz McKenzie.
Yes,
Is that
before,
correct?
sorry, yes, it is. Before we hear from Councillor McKenzie, I just want to check if the others who are joining the meeting can hear.
Yes, good idea.
I've had messages in that Zeb and Mark, and I think David may have joined the meeting, but could they just indicate that I got a message that they're in the meeting, but I didn't get a request to let them in, which is fine, but I just want to know that they are in, or do I need to do something? So, Zeb Etheridge, can you hear me, or? No, okay, look, that's all right. I'll let you get on with your questions and I'll, oh, he can hear me loud and clear, sorry. Thanks, Zeb. Also, Mark Alexander, can you hear me?
Certainly can.
Lovely, and David Hawke, I think you're in as well.
Well, thank you all very much. Yeah, thank you, Louise.
Thank you.
Well, welcome to the meeting to the other submitters that have just joined us. When we're ready to hear you, you'll know, we hope. So we'll just have to persevere a bit for this, but a while with this, because it's all new for all of us. So we're just talking with the first submitters still, the representatives of the Federated Farmers. So we'll just go on to the next person who had a question. I think it was Councillor Elizabeth McKenzie. Over to you, Liz.
Yeah, hi. So my question relates to a point in the written submission from Federated Farmers. So there's a comment saying that lack of water reliability can result in locking in dairy as a first choice land use rather than arable land use. So I was just wondering, Jason or Lionel, if you could expand a bit more on this?
Yeah, I could make a brief comment about that. It wasn't intended to be a comment that dairying was in any way undesirable, but merely to point out that there's a bit of an irony that sometimes the same people that sort of put dairying up as some kind of bad thing also oppose development of water infrastructure. And I think I commented before that if we want diversity of land use, and if particularly we want people to go down the route of high value arable and horticultural crops, that requires reliable water. Otherwise it's just too risky. Whereas dairying can put up with a degree of reliability, albeit at some cost.
Okay, and my second question was around water infrastructure and water storage. So I'm assuming that you would envisage, when you talk about water infrastructure, either small scale or large scale dams. Are you also thinking of any other types of water infrastructure, like rainwater collection, that type of thing?
Oh, it could include anything. I think we need to be quite broad about how we think about this. Obviously, we've got vast amounts of water that flow down our alpine rivers, fed by, well, the climate change prediction suggests that we're going to get more rain on the west coast and in the main divide, so there'll be more water in those alpine rivers, and we already use very little of that proportionally. So there's an ideal opportunity if we want to build overall resilience, obviously to store some of that and distribute it. So the infrastructure would include storage, distribution networks, use of rainfall. Well, we use rainfall now, it falls on the ground. People use it, and speaking from a farming perspective, we're very glad when it does because it avoids the cost of irrigating. So okay. And obviously water gets stored in aquifers. There's all sorts of options. We need to consider them all.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you, Councillor, and thank you, Lionel. Councillor Ian McKenzie, I believe you had a question.
Yeah, g'day, Lionel. My question is actually more aimed, I think, probably for Jason. Jason, you touched on the impact of the virus on agricultural economy, and it looks like the dairy industry in particular will get quite a significant haircut, and the meat industry is likely to be impacted, but it's uncertain as to in terms of pricing. Have you got a view as to the impact on the rural support economy that will be a result of the flow down of flow up and flow down, lack of tourism, the turning of events, or the turning of conditions, financial conditions for agriculture, what the effect is likely to be on rural townships and support industries that we rely on?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a really hard one to predict where we're going to end up with this. I mean, we're hoping that things will bounce back in the medium term for agricultural commodity prices, and us to carry on, because I mean, obviously, food's that staple of survival. It's just I suppose the ability for some countries overseas to pay for it, and how much trade routes are affected, and costs of shipping, and all those things there. So that's that side of it. So when it comes to the flow-on effects into smaller towns, I mean, fairly where I live is a great example. I mean, it's a bit like a ghost town now. I mean, it was amazing. It's back to what it was like 10 or 15 years ago. It's just the less amount of traffic, and so that will be having an effect on the smaller small businesses that rely not just on agriculture but on other industries. Just the slowdown and even the shutdown of the lockdown, what we're having, and how that's affecting tradespeople. I just saw a local plumber driving a truck this morning. I mean, his work's obviously dried up. So there's a huge amount of flow-on effects that will happen sort of domestically and from the international markets. But yeah, it's so hard to predict, really. It's just we're just in that time where we just don't know what's going to happen. So I think everyone is trying to tighten their belt as much as possible, just so we can ride this out and survive it.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Jack.
If I can just follow up on that,
just quickly, Councillor, quickly, because we're getting well behind. Thank you.
So your message, your clear message to Lionel and Jason, to us is around fiscal responsibility, given the significant change of circumstance we find ourselves in.
Oh, definitely, and that's, I think it's a lot of it's around the unknowns. So we all just have to tighten our belts and just ride this out and see what happens. Hopefully that you give it a year or 18 months or a couple of years even, that will bounce back. But there will be some industries that will take a lot longer, and so it's really unknown. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Jason. Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. We'll just move on to Councillor Clearwater, but before we do that, I just have to say that we are getting behind a long way. I just think we just have to go with the flow of it. For the other people listening in, I'm sorry if this is holding you up too much, but since we've never done this before and we're all in a very strange situation, so I think I'll try and speed it up a little bit, but we'll just have to go with the flow here. I'm finding it very interesting, as I'm sure all the other councillors are. So Councillor Clearwater, your question, please.
Thanks, Jenny, and I'll try and be brief. It's a question for you, Lionel, and thank you for your submission. And also, I really like your point about the communities building their resilience. I just wanted to ask you, though, in terms of our financial position as a council, you're really saying, look, that projects that have a direct mandate are the ones that we should fund, and shelve others that are on the fringe. I just wondered if you might be able to give us any examples of what you would consider on the fringe, and perhaps any reason for those. Thank you.
I guess that's your judgment to make. I'd like to start by turning it around a wee bit. I see the water management stuff as being the real core of council's core business. And yeah, there's all sorts of nice to have stuff, I guess, at the edges. That you can probably identify a lot more easily than I can. But yeah, I think rather than suggesting stuff that could be chucked out. Rather say, when you make the list of priorities, I think the water management stuff needs to be right at the heart of what council does and resources.
Thanks, Lionel. My other quick question, if I may, Jenny, is just for farmers who are, say, in a particularly difficult financial position, being clearly who might want to even defer, say, their rate payment or defer the rate payment. Do you think in a sufficient rating system there's sufficient scope, given the particular hardship that many farmers currently face?
Lionel or Grant, did you want to respond to that question? Maybe Grant's gone again, has he?
I'm not sure that Lionel heard
Jason, I mean. Jason,
yeah, just summarise it again for me.
Oh, it's basically, Lionel, do you consider that the rating system that councils have, especially from ECAN, say, that in fact there's sufficient flexibility for farmers who are in a real financial strife to be able to, say, defer their rent payments?
Oh, well, I think that would be a useful thing to be able to do. I think we've got to look quite creatively at that sort of situation, especially now. Some people are going to be fairly cash strapped, and probably people in town just as much as farmers. There's going to be lots of people who've lost their jobs, and it's going to be all sorts of people in fairly dire conditions. So I think council does need to, I guess, think quite creatively about this issue, and indeed be, I guess the word is compassionate. People are going to be in some pretty difficult situations. Farmers, so that we're interested in, but a whole bunch of other people in the community too, especially those who've lost jobs.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Councillor Clearwater, and thank you, Lionel. Being creative is what we have to do in this situation. Yeah. I'm sure we all agree. So we're being a little bit creative with this hearing this morning as well. Louise, was there anybody else I've missed who wanted to ask the Federated Farmers a question? Well, nobody's telling me I've missed anybody. So we might say to both Lionel and Jason, thank you very much for making your submission. It's really part of how democracy works. So we're really glad that you're out there as an organisation and that you're taking the time to come and present to us this morning. And we do hope you're both personally very well in your bubble and everything's going good, and we can all look after each other, I guess. So we might just finish with you, but look, I'm sure if this is all right with Louise and we're not mucking up the technology, you're welcome to stay in the room and listen in for as long as you like. So that's all fine, isn't it, Louise?
Yeah, that's fine, Jenny.
All right, so we'll
Graham's
move
next.
on. Yes. Well,
thank you.
Yes. Welcome, Graham. Very nice to see you again. Everybody should know that I vaguely know Mr. Tate through my sister meeting him in Bhutan in 1989 when she was working up there. So welcome, Graham. We're looking forward to hearing from you. Right. Are you right, Graham?
Have you unmuted your microphone?
Can you let him know, Louise?
Yes, just a moment. Yes.
Well, maybe something's gone wrong with Graham's mic, do you think, Louise? It seems like it. So maybe we should move on to the next person.
It might be worth just saying to Graham to wave his mouse across the screen and a little box pops up with the microphone. That might help if he's sort of lost it. Because it does disappear if you're inactive for a while.
It does, I know. It's a real problem.
So if you can hear us, Graham.
Louise, have you got any way of communicating with Graham?
Send him a chat.
Yeah, he might send him a chat. I think she's done that. Have you, Louise?
I can't see it.
Louise, can you unmute him?
Yes,
are you able to? Louise, are you able to unmute him?
What's his name? What's his initials? Sorry.
His name is Graham Tate.
Okay, I can see a GT.
Yeah, so just unmute him. Who's that? You, Genevieve?
Yes.
Oh, that's
sorry.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
I can't quite do it though. He hasn't. Yeah.
Well, wait a minute. Louise must be online. So, Louise,
I'm
are
back.
can you?
Yes, mine went off. Mine went offline. I had to come into the meeting. I've just sent a message to
Louise, I can remove him, and if you can quickly let him know that he'll need to rejoin, I'll remove him. If you move on to the next person, I'll get him out of the meeting and get him to rejoin, if that's okay.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's great. So we'll move on to the next person then.
Genevieve.
Louise,
yes. God.
It's Genevieve.
Genevieve,
Genevieve. Are you all right to go? Welcome to the meeting and lovely to hear you online again. Thank you very much. Over to you.
That's okay. I feel a little bit slightly underprepared because it's been like a day. However, so basically, I don't want to go over my whole deputation or anything like that. That's a bit ridiculous. But so in the last few weeks since I put in my submission for the annual plan, I really have come to the decision that I put in my submission, I asked for a further, I think from memory, I don't have it in front of me, it was $400,000 or $500,000 up to $1 million for the regional coastal plan. I think it's lacking in funds. I think 1.4 million over 3 years is actually quite laughable. The reason being is the plan is 15 years out of date. So it's 5 years past its statutory expiry. So really it's not even a credible document right now. That concerns me. And also within the regional statement, there's a lot of areas which I guess as a regional council, you have jurisdiction over and you should be monitoring and the like, and it hasn't really been happening. So there's a lot of leeway here. We can make movements right now without having to wait for the coastal plan as such. But so firstly, the annual plan, I put in a submission for that funding because I believe that a plan change is probably required and it'll take far less time. I know it's costing hundreds of thousands of dollars. However, that's the reason I put in my submission for that amount. So if we wait 4 years for the coastal plan to come out as a new document with all the consultation, the draft, the public submissions, everything, we're looking at possibly around 40 hectares dolphin deaths. Now, there's evidence of this because Department of Conservation holds a very accurate incident database, which includes live strandings and deaths. And the majority of those deaths, in excess of 80 to 90%, is from fishing. So time is of the essence. We need to do something now, not in 6 months' time, which will push it out to 4 years. We need to do something very, very soon. Otherwise, it's sort of legal action time. I'm sorry. That includes an entire ecosystem look at, and it's not going to cost the earth because there's people here who are willing to do it for next to nothing, if not nothing. I'm one of them. What else did I have to say? Yeah, that's about it, really.
Oh, well, that's very, yeah, that's excellent. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us, Genevieve. Who's got a question for Genevieve? I think I see Councillor Marshall. Would you like to ask your question?
Hi, Nicole.
Thank you, Jenny. Hi, Genevieve. Awesome to
Hi.
see you again. Just because I'm aware that we are part of this bureaucratic machine and things do take time, what would you like to see happen within 6 months that we can realistically do?
A plan change.
So how do we get that done within 6 months, knowing that we have the legal obligation to consult?
Well, a plan change is one thing, and you will have to consult, yes, but the time frame is looking at 2 years for a completed document as opposed to 4. So I know which one I'd choose. There will be funding released on the 1st of July, I'm told. So we'll have an indication of what money comes from the annual plan. We do know there's 1.4 million available. There's also the long-term plan. So it hasn't been utilised to its full capacity in a very long time, and there must be some sort of rollover of those funds to a degree for use in this. So I'm asking for some seriousness to look at this because, A, we are in a position here in Canterbury alone, we have one of the most stronghold populations in the country. We have to show that we're serious. And by that, yes, I believe we do need submitters. We do need the public to listen. We need the public to speak. But plan change is the fastest way of doing it, and you get more people thinking about it in a short amount of time.
That's awesome. Thank you, Genevieve.
That's all right. I hope that answers something.
Thank you, Genevieve.
Sorry,
yes,
Jenny, before we go to Councillor Elizabeth McKenzie, can I just check to see if Graham Tate, we think he's back in the meeting. I just want to make sure he's okay. Okay. All right. Well, I'll let you get on with the questions, and we'll work on that. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Louise. Genevieve, we've got another question now from Councillor Elizabeth McKenzie.
Sure.
Elizabeth.
Yeah. Hi, Genevieve.
Hi.
I'm wondering what sort of non-statutory measures do you think could be taken that could be effective by regional councils, Department of Conservation, that sort of all of the organisations working together potentially? Do you have any ideas about that?
Well, working with the Minister of Conservation would be blissful. She has an authority to change, certain functions and restrict certain elements of human-based activities in that area. She has, at the click of her fingers, she can pretty much work towards that. I would like her as well to see the seriousness of this. I've had many room discussions with her, and I don't think she considers it a priority. I would hope that regional councillors and the public would consider it a priority. And I think based on your policy statements, that were 10 years ago, there's a lot of areas in there that are quite obviously asking for monitoring and mitigation from the regional council, but I feel it's been lacking in many areas. It's not all about water quality, it's what the water hosts and biodiversity and sorry, that's me repeating. And the native taonga species and everything is actually also listed in there. So, we've got something to lever off. Yeah, if that makes sense. I probably need to talk about it in more detail with a group, but that's the best I can do right now.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Genevieve. That's really good. Any other questions for Genevieve, Louise? No.
Okay.
All right. Well, we might sign off with you there, Genevieve.
Okay.
Thank you very much for coming online. Like the Federated Farmers, you're welcome to stay on and listen. Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, I might listen.
And I hope everything's good in your bubble. It looks like you're pretty good there for me.
Oh no,
It looks lovely.
Almost going mad, but that's right.
Well, this isn't a sign of madness. This is a sign of participating in democracy. So thank you very much. You're doing really well.
Thank you.
All right, Louise. Louise, over to you to talk to the next person.
I think Graham Tate is back in the meeting. He's joined the meeting.
Yeah,
oh, lovely. And you can turn off your mute and speak to our councillors. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Graham Tate. I'm speaking as a citizen, but one who's had a life working experience in agriculture and leadership. And it seems to me that at this particular time, ECAN need to think more about future than past, and when reviewing the draft annual plan, give added recognition to the effects of climate change on ECAN policies. And as climate change gets more pronounced each month, the action amongst leading risks as identified by the World Action Forum is emphasised. And I think that while the annual plan gives mention of climate change, it doesn't show it as a number one priority going through everything. And I think that it needs to be done. Am I coming through?
Yes, Mr. Tate, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, thanks for that. I think COVID-19 gives an unprecedented opportunity to reset our direction towards a sustainable future. And for this to happen, we've got to change visions into actions. COVID-19 shown we can work, buy necessities, responsibly interact, and cooperate in ways we've never previously imagined in New Zealand. The societal makeup in which ECAN operates has dramatically changed in the early months of this year. And I think you need to revise your annual plan to reflect this change. It's now got the opportunity, and I think the obligation, to be a leader in innovation, experimentation, and uptake of new approaches. And this is obviously a far different thing to the detail of your changes to the current annual plan. Maybe it means offering no fare public transport. Such would encourage usage, reduce transport times through hop-on, hop-off travel, and help young people to make public transport use their habit, a habit to which once accustomed could prevail through more mature years. We've suddenly seen how fibre broadband is widely available. This gives hugely improved technological opportunity, especially the transport flows. And now we've got 5G technology starting this year, which is going to extend the possibilities far beyond where traditional thinking has led. Rod Drury is the founder and former CEO of Xero, one of New Zealand, and is one of New Zealand's most influential entrepreneurs. He talks of software chained buses, picking up on demand and dropping off at crossover points. Such a service can dramatically reduce carbon emissions, reduce empty running, reducing roading infrastructure, yet give a far better service for customers. I see no emphasis on such opportunities in the annual plan, and I think there needs to be. Drury talks of the need for larger water storage areas to provide reservoirs to protect electricity availability and city water supplies during periods of drought. I know you've already had a look at this in discussion with the Federated Farmers representatives, but again, I don't see any emphasis on this in your annual plan, and I think there needs to be. With dual irrigation usage, such large reservoirs would also serve to protect food production for home consumption and export. Larger reservoirs provide greater recreation, tourism, and wildlife benefits. I commend Drury's future gazing to ECAN planners to insist in better meeting the challenges the organisation now faces. I know you're dealing in the detail, but I think you have to deal in the overall thing in a much broader way. Breaking the habit of getting into one's car to drive somewhere has been forced on us by COVID lockdown. We need to take advantage of this habit change by making public transport available in a manner which helps put climate change as number one. ECAN's already shown its willingness to innovate with the Timaru Booker Bus scheme. COVID-19 may have interrupted the experiment, but it surely has also extended the potential of the scheme. I'm going to talk about just one advantage of a Booker Bus scheme that it could strongly benefit me personally, so I've got a personal interest. I and many thousands of elderly live within retirement villages in Christchurch. Many of these villages do not have easy access to public transport. This village that I'm in, we've got to walk a kilometre to get to the nearest bus stop, and many elderly can't do that. Many elderly continue to drive carbon-emitting old cars when probably both driver and car should not be on the road. A Booker bus operation utilising small software-chained electric buses could get many of these off the road. Such a Booker bus operation would improve road safety, would reduce emissions and provide a transport service that meets the needs of one of ECAN's target communities. Such a service is currently lacking for many elderly within ECAN's transport operation. Given an effective Booker bus scheme, new retirement village construction could eliminate resident, staff and much visitor car parking space. Doing this would reduce the footprint area required per resident, and this in turn would increase the affordability of retirement villages for funders. More villages at lower cost would have an effect on a wide range of social services, including healthcare, recreation and mental well-being. The village I live in has a total of about 700 residents and staff. Such a concentration enables more efficient provision of services like electricity, water, rubbish recycling and disposal than if we were in individually owned homes. All of this links to climate change mitigation, which I think should be ECAN's number one overriding priority. There are many iterations of how a Booker bus scheme could better serve retirement village residents and staff compared to present public transport. And if ECAN was interested in exploring such, I suggest they need to have a series of focus groups in significant villages to better define specific needs and to develop ideas on the most effective way to operate in a modern technological age. Future New Zealand must be both environmentally and socially friendly. I believe ECAN has the opportunity to take a much greater regional leadership role within this. As a start, extending the Booker bus system can significantly reduce environmental degradation while enhancing social opportunity and reducing cost and service provision. I realise that the annual plan submission is dealing with a lot of detail, but I think ECAN must grasp the challenge of demonstrating its innovation leadership within this current annual plan. The country is now experiencing and welcoming bold actions. I urge ECAN to capitalise on this within its operations. With this plea, I end my submissions and thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Well, thank you very much, Graham. And we have a number of questions, starting with Councillor Farn. Your question, please.
Kia ora, Graham. Councillor Lan Farm here. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Unfortunately, I can't see you. I'm just fiddling with my settings at the moment.
Excellent.
Yeah.
No, that's okay. So I just wanted to refer to something you said in your submission. You suggested that we could actively impose restrictions on those factors advancing climate change. And you've very clearly outlined, you know, a number of solutions that you see in the transport space, and that's been really helpful. I was just wondering if you had thoughts on other factors that were advancing climate change which you'd like to see action on.
Yes, I think, as was discussed before, the water is a key area. If we're going to advance climate change, we're obviously going to go electric in many ways. We're lucky to have sustainable electricity, but that has to be in a situation where it's utterly reliable. And to be utterly reliable, we have to counter or have to be prepared for droughts, particularly on the East Coast. So I think water reservoirs have to be established, and they have to be big. I think food production is going to be one of the main things of New Zealand, and we need to have reliable irrigation for the sort of food production that we're going to need in the future, which is going to be away probably from animal production. So I think water storage capacity, both helping in terms of revenue for the countryside, but also in the long term helping biodiversity, helping tourism, helping recreation and social well-being.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. The next person that would like to ask a question of you, Graham, is Councillor Elizabeth Mackenzie.
Hi, Graham. I read your written submission, and I was interested to see that you raised the issue of population growth. I was quite pleased to see that not many people raise that, and they need to be quite brave to raise that issue. But I'm just interested to know how you think a regional council would promote zero population growth and work with DHBs and central government presumably to achieve that outcome. What would you sort of envisage?
I think it has to be seen as a social activity, and as such, to my mind, we should no longer be trying to make it easier for people to fund large families. I think we should say that while I'm in total support of helping children to benefit, I think it's wrong to provide incentives by government support for people to have larger families. And I think perhaps COVID-19 is a reflection in some ways of countries where families have continued to expand largely and have found it more difficult to bring it under control. So I have to show I'm at 85, I'm definitely in favour of end-of-life choice options. I think that's another way where we reduce the cost to communities of old people, including myself. So I think ECAN, in terms of an organisation which has leadership on a regional basis, needs to be pointing out to central government the difficulties fast rising population has in terms of meeting our obligations and restricting climate change.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. The next person who would like to ask you a question, Graham, is Councillor Phil Clearwater.
Well, hi, Graham. Thanks for your submission. I'm particularly around carbon emissions and transport. You've suggested that buses be free. You're probably aware, Graham, that currently the funding model involves rates and central government subsidy, but also the fares. I just wondered, in terms of making buses and I really like the idea, your suggestion around really transferring I guess what's been the Timaru model with My Way to what you call Book a Bus. To make that work, I just wondered if you thought that organisations where there's or villages where there's a large number of people, like for example retirement villages, if there might be potential for a retirement village to be a partner in say a transport scheme like you're suggesting. And by that I mean, is it possible they may provide some funding or some sort of subsidy too?
I certainly can't speak, but I'm a member of the Ryman group, and the Ryman already in our village have had to put on their own transport to try and overcome the removal of the orbital bus from passing by our village. So Ryman are already funding vehicles in a number of situations. While I can't speak for Ryman, of course, I would think that that opportunity for a book a bus system, a little bit along the lines of the Timaru model, fashioned to retirement villages, would be able to get funding support.
Thank you, Graham.
Yes, thank you very much, Graham. I think that we're now at the end of the people that wanted to ask you questions. So I just want to say thank you very much for your considered submission. It's really fantastic to hear from you. And I hope everything's going well in your bubble. And it's a good time to read up and do some research. So I think you've been doing that. So thank you very much, and have a good day. We'll now move on. We'll now move on, Louise, to the next person.
Yes, thanks, Jenny. The next person is Zeb Etheridge, who has been online, and I can see he's still. Are you still there, Zeb?
I am. Good morning, Louise. Good morning, councillors.
Good morning.
Good morning. Well, thank you very much. We'll hand over to you now and ask you to do your submission. And thank you for listening online. And I'm sorry it's taken a bit more time than we thought, but we just have to experiment with this new way of doing it. So it's very exciting to have you here. So over to you.
You're welcome, no problem at all. I'm just wondering, am I able to share my screen? I think I might be able to. And this one here. So is that working? I put together, I was trying to keep reasonably brief because I know you have a lot to get through. I put a few slides together with my main points. Is that showing up on the screen now?
Yes, it has. Yes, very good. Okay. We can see it.
Excellent. That's good. Technology is working well. So my first point that I've made in my submission was really an expression of support for electrification of the bus fleet. So I'm still supportive of that, and I think we have a role as citizens and parents and ratepayers to, I guess, particularly in one of the more affluent countries of the world, to be doing our part to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions. And that means that we need to spend some more money now to advance that. But having said that, I recognise that people are going to be struggling with loss of incomes and so on with COVID-19, and so there'll be some challenges around that. But I just wanted to express my personal support for the council to continue its efforts in mitigating greenhouse gas emissions from its public transport fleet. So that was the first point. The second point, I'd spent a little bit of time in the submission talking about the role of regional councils in greenhouse gas mitigation through consenting process and so on. But after making that submission, I became aware of the work that's going on in central government around the RMA and so on to look into that issue. So because that's kind of a live issue, I won't dwell on that one. The main points I want to talk through this morning are around the kind of biodiversity portfolio and the climate change hazards risk and resilience portfolio. So on the biodiversity and biosecurity portfolio, then I've, I guess amongst quite a few other people, I've become more concerned about insect population declines. Now, we all know that insects are kind of at the foundation of our food webs and are really important for all we do, but they're, you know, they don't get the same kind of public interest and coverage that, you know, kind of the fishes and the dolphins and so on sometimes do. The little critters kind of get forgotten about a bit, but they're super important. And there was a good paper that came out from a bunch of authors in Nature Journal relatively recently, where they put together a roadmap to recovery of insect populations. And I think there's a potential role for Environment Canterbury in this. And these no regret solutions, I mean, who can argue with a no regret solution? These are things that I think ECAN can potentially weave into kind of everyday activities to help manage some of these issues with loss of insects. So I put some little arrows on there where I thought there's opportunities for ECAN. So when we're kind of looking at it used to be called immediate steps. I don't know if it still is, but these programs, which often are very focused on riparian planting, I wondered if there's perhaps an opportunity when we're considering these restoration programs to think about how we can expand the habitats for insect populations to help build them some resilience from all the things we're throwing at them, like climate change, loss of habitat, pesticides, and so on. And then in our education, in the council's education capacity, I think there's opportunities there. I know the council and staff do kind of outreach to community and schools and so on. So there's perhaps an opportunity for some awareness building there. And I guess kind of moving around the circle there, kind of heterogeneity in the landscape. This again, I'm seeing nearly all of these things, and possibly all of them, as being in the kind of influencing without authority space rather than the regulatory space. But I think with the staff, with the biodiversity teams, and some of the expertise that council has available within the staff, there are people who can help to kind of promote the cause of insects and help to start to try and deal with some of this decline. And one of the things that gets picked up on quite a lot is pesticide usage. So my next slide here, I just found this when I was doing some digging around yesterday. It was in the latest 2020 report that came out from MFE on stats and stats called Our Freshwater, showing the fairly significant increase in pesticide usage going back to the 1990s. And things spiked up fairly significantly a few years ago, but and have dropped back down a bit since then. But I kind of wonder what opportunity Environment Canterbury might have for starting to tackle pesticide usage and bring it back to more sustainable levels. And it seems within the regulations, like the HASNO regs, there are some opportunities for Environment Canterbury to play a role. So obviously I'm no expert on this kind of thing, but it seemed that those regulations do provide provisions that would allow Environment Canterbury to act. And I kind of started wondering, well, when we're going out, when council and staff, when staff are going out to site to look at, to do farm environment plan audits and so on, is there an opportunity there to talk to farmers about their pesticide usage and talk to them about the benefits, both in terms of costs and environmental outcomes from reducing usage? And if staff and the advisors who go out there are kind of well informed themselves about the kind of issues and the opportunities in the space, then maybe without incurring additional costs and resources, then Environment Canterbury can kind of play its part in trying to reverse this insect population decline. So yeah, that was there's lots of good material out there, which I'm sure kind of the experts working in this area are familiar with. But there's been some calls to overhaul New Zealand's pesticide rules, and perhaps there's an opportunity for council to petition central government or express their support of looking into this further. So yeah, that's my first point around the biodiversity portfolio. Then my second, the main points now of my submission around climate change, hazards and risk and resilience. So yeah, I guess I'm fairly well aligned with what Graham Tate was saying around the climate and ecological emergency, that the integration program is a great first step, but to me it feels a bit more like business as usual than what I'd kind of expect from an emergency response after council recognised the climate emergency last year. But thinking particularly about resource constraints and what we can, I keep saying we, I spent 5 years at Environment Canterbury, as many of you know, and I find it hard to drop the habit of saying we every time I speak. So anyway, so I see the opportunity perhaps at team leader and section manager level and at staff level to do some more in this space within existing resources. So at that section manager and team leader level, there may be an opportunity perhaps for developing emergency action plans for the climate and ecological crisis as part of the strategic planning for the year ahead. And depending on that team, that plan might focus on mitigation opportunities in, say, the kind of transport teams, or adaptation and resilience building in other parts of the organisation. So, so I think, yeah, through some strategic planning at team and section level, then the organisation could identify opportunities. And then perhaps the climate and ecological emergency could be a standing agenda item on regular meetings. So I know health and safety is a standing agenda item in team meetings. The climate and ecological emergencies, to me, are equally pressing and important for our long-term health and even existence, perhaps longer term. So having those as a regular agenda item to keep them kind of front and centre at people's minds seems quite important to me. And then moving to staff level, every year, as you probably all are aware, there's performance objectives set for staffs. And I see this as a good mechanism whereby you could kind of unlock the huge kind of potential and problem solving and expertise of staff within the organisation to help tackle the climate and ecological emergency. So in those objectives, there are things like health and safety, customer focus, and business acumen. But if you brought in a criteria for work to tackle these climate and ecological emergencies, I think staff would, through their everyday roles, identify things that they can do as part of their jobs to mitigate greenhouse gas emissions, to educate people, to raise the issue in people's minds as kind of a top issue for our communities, and identify things that we can do to build resilience. And that's in the water resource space, like Lionel was talking about, of building resilience into our water supplies so that we've got a resilient agriculture sector. And then also echoing some of the other points about food resilience and the importance of locally and nationally sourced food supplies. I think that's been brought into a lot more focus by the pandemic, but it seems, when the organisation talks about regional leadership, then food resilience for the region seems to be an important thing, and perhaps some work could be done on that. And then getting back to my last point, which is, again, echoing what Genevieve was saying about the coastal environment plan and also the regional policy statement. And I agree that a review of the coastal environment plan is well overdue. What I'm seeing in my work as a water resource scientist is that we're suffering a little bit from kind of a lack of direction and science support and leadership in terms of coastal adaptation and response. So by way of example, both Waimakariri District Council and Christchurch District Council have been doing some work to understand the effect of sea level rise on groundwater and what that means for flooding. And they're both engaging consultants to go and do this work, whereas in reality, that work could have been done more efficiently and probably to a better standard by using the capabilities of the staff within ECAN and considering it as a kind of a joined up program. So I'm kind of seeing that, there's some inefficiencies and some issues kind of coming in through that kind of absence of direction and kind of a strong foundation of science that Environment Canterbury could provide in the kind of coastal hazard space. The other thing I'd like to alert your attention to is there's a report that came out recently, I think late last year, under the National Science Challenge Programme, Resilience to Nature's Challenges, where it's looked at what does it take for coastal communities to be able to, or for us to be able to, as a kind of society, to be able to adapt our coastal communities to rising sea levels. And it's emphasising the importance of regional council rules as a really key tool. District councils are quite limited in what they can do, particularly in the managed retreat space. So it's really important that council starts to look at that and understand its role and its opportunities in supporting proactive adaptation of the coastal zone to rising sea levels and climate change. That report also talks about the regional policy statement and the importance of that in supporting managed retreat or assessing kind of managed retreat and when it should happen. It also identifies some kind of constraints in section 85 of the RMA. And so that might be something that council could petition central government to do some work on. That National Science Challenge report makes that recommendation, but if that could be echoed by council, I think that would kind of give some more weight to it. So yeah, that was it. Thank you very much for your time.
Oh, thank you very much for your submission, Zeb. We'll just see Councillor Elizabeth. Well, first of all, we've got a number of questions. I'll just have a look through the notes. I think the first person wanting to ask a question is Councillor Edge. Your question, please.
Oh, hi, Zeb. Grant Edge speaking. Good to see you again. Zeb, just a couple of things. First of all, your presentation you've just given the slides. Is there any chance that you could send us into the ECAN team for us to have as supporting information to your original submission?
Absolutely. I'll send that on to Louise.
That would be great. Secondly, yeah, I really liked your comments about pesticides. I was thinking too the other day, looking at something on Country Calendar of a guy in the Maniatoto who was adopting regenerative agriculture, didn't use pesticides, insecticides, low water regime, and he was making lots of money. Is there a scope, do you think, for Environment Canterbury for future visioning to provide a wee bit more emphasis, education and support around regenerative agriculture?
I absolutely believe there is, Grant, and I understand that the regenerative agriculture kind of field days that have been put on have been really widely supported by farmers, and they've had a really good turnout. So it seems to me there's a real appetite for this at the moment. And, you know, again, I think it's probably a space where the organisation is kind of influencing without authority and kind of leading rather than kind of regulating, but it kind of working in that collaborative space that the organisation is so good at. I do see a lot of opportunity there and a lot of appetite for it.
Great, thanks very much.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor Edge, and thank you, Zeb. Councillor Vicky Southworth, have you got a question?
Sorry, hi. No, mine was really about just getting a hold of that presentation, and particularly the paper that you referenced at the end. That would be really helpful. And no, it was a really good presentation, and thank you. But no, I didn't have a question, Jenny. It was just a request. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We have a question from Councillor Elizabeth Mackenzie.
Yep, I've got two questions. So the first one is around the insects and the pesticide issue. I was actually thinking in particular about our braided rivers and the necessity to spray the braided rivers for vegetation growth, pest plants, and the possible impact of this on freshwater insects and terrestrial insects in this sort of environment. So I think, yeah, what do you think about you know, perhaps would we need to have some sort of cross-agency working party on this? Because if we have, for example, Department of Conservation coming in and doing a lot of spraying, and then that having an impact, and we're, you know, advocating don't use pesticides, and yet we're actually using them, you know, how would you sort of envisage different agencies working together on this?
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And I guess and also the territorial authorities, all the work that they do to kind of maintain the flood capacity of streams and rivers. And I know members of the community have raised concerns about that in some of the processes I've been involved in. So yeah, that kind of regional leadership space of bringing those different parties and organisations together to find solutions. And I know I heard I kind of asked one of City Council's workers who was out spraying what she was spraying with, and she said, well, they're trying a new product because it's that's less harmful. But then she was saying there's some kind of challenges around it. So kind of sharing some of those learnings across organisations. Yeah, I completely agree. It does need to be worked through that way.
Okay, my second question is from your written submission. You made the comment to stop assessing climate change as a gradual, slow threat and to start looking at it in a sort of 20-year time frame. Can you speak more to that?
Yeah, this is a subject that's close to my heart and something I'm in the process of submitting a research funding application for, because one of the research funding rounds that's out at the moment from central government is asking researchers to look at the impact and the increase in the incidence of adverse events. And obviously we know that kind of under average conditions, average rainfall, average temperature kind of year, things are generally okay. It's the extremes that always hurt us. So that's been my point, really, was about us understanding those extremes and managing, setting up our management systems and our water storage systems, like Lionel and Federated Farmers were saying, so that we can survive in those and try and thrive still in those extreme years, like the 2016-17 Super El Nino event. So it's about kind of moving away from presenting climate change in terms of 2050, 2070, 2100 horizons, and bringing it back into those, those increasing extreme events and severe fluctuations in the climate that are gonna hurt us. And I think it's a really important area for more research, and then for kind of more planning and resilience building through the organisation.
Okay, thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Councillor, and thank you, Zeb, and thank you very much for your presentation. I know we have got some other questions, but I just want to check with the Council Secretary about our timing here, because as everyone's aware, we've got behind and we're just letting that happen at the moment, but there might be a time when we're going to shut down. Louise, would you like to make a comment, please?
Yes, thanks, Jenny. Just also to welcome David Hawke and John Bennett from the Horswell residents. I'm just let them know that we are running late. Mark Alexander is next, and then so we've got two more to go. We've got Mark, and then we've got the Horswell residents. We can go beyond 10:30.
Right.
I don't. I'll double check that, but I don't think it'll just end because the meeting ends.
All right.
Yeah, we know we can keep going. So we've got.
Right. Well, thank you very much. All right. Well, look, I think we've just decided that we will keep going. So I hope that's all right with everybody. So we'll just go back to Councillor Clearwater. If you make your question quick, you've got a question for Zeb, please.
Thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Zeb. Zeb, I just wanted to ask you, I heard a lecture from Professor Jack Heinemann recently around the increased sort of use of herbicides and pesticides and the cumulative effect of those, that in fact our immunity systems for humans is really at risk. I'm just wondering if you might make a comment around his work or work that's been done around that area.
Thank you for the question. I'm certainly no expert on this. I do have a personal concerns about that after doing some readings about what our kind of high levels of pesticide and herbicide ingestion are doing to us, and I try and find products that have got that are spray free. But yeah, this is something I'm kind of expressing as a kind of concerned citizen and member of the community, rather than anything I've got any expertise in.
Okay, thanks, Zeb.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Zeb. Thank you for taking the time to make your submission, and I certainly appreciate technology in your slides that we'll delightfully receive. And I hope everything's going well in your bubble and you seem to be on track, so that's great. So take care, and we'll go on to the next submitter now, and it's Mark Alexander. So welcome to our hearing, and we'll hear from you now, please.
Thank you. I can't see myself, so I presume that I'll turn up at some point.
I can see you. You're looking great.
Thank you very much. Morena, and good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to my submission today. May I reiterate, this is my personal submission as a ratepayer, parent and public transport user, not in any other role that you may know me as. Times have changed, and they certainly continue to change in the months since my submission was written, but the points that I want to discuss remain the same. Firstly, when I came to write my submission, I found your online rating tool actually very unhelpful. I couldn't get the rating comparisons that I wanted out of it. And its examples are poor. Rural Selwyn, and particularly in the eastern part of Selwyn where I live, isn't all large farms. It's considerable in areas of lifestyle blocks, and the only rating example was a large farm. My main point of submission is that I support the goal of improving patronage on our public transport, as this will help us achieve our climate change goals. It's our goal, not just your goal. It's our goal as a region and as a country. The A20 Route Consultation was poor. When it discussed extending the route, it only offered one option for funding that, and that was by cutting the timetable. I've given reasons in my submission why I believe that cutting the timetable is in fact a very poor option and will actually not help. The consultation said that this was a poorly patronised service, but I would suggest that this and many other poorly patronised services are also poorly publicised. So we have a catch-22, that a service, if it's not publicised, will probably be poorly patronised. I've foreshadowed in my submission on the fare boundaries and the fare review coming up later this year. I think a great impediment to Selwyn public transport uptake is the fact that it's 2 zones to the city from the majority of the Selwyn area. It's absurd that I can catch the bus from Templeton to Sumner Redcliffs as 1 zone, but from Templeton to Rolleston is 2 zones. And even more absurd, Prebbleton to Lincoln is 2 zones. It makes no sense. I believe that should be changed, and I believe that the cost of that change should be funded through the Selwyn public transport rates. As I believe the change to the 820 route should be funded in the same way. I would like you to keep regional control over public transport. The largest territorial authority wants to wrest this control from you, but I don't believe that would be in the interest of anybody but themselves. Public transport spans territorial authority boundaries and should remain under your control, working with the TLAs and not under a single TLA. Additional comments. I've been impressed with the previous speakers, Mr. Tate and Mr. Etheridge, comments regarding public transport, and I support a lot of what they've said. In this time of COVID-19 environment, you're under a lot of pressure to reduce your rates. I'd actually encourage you to resist that pressure with respect to public transport. I believe that increasing patronage of public transport will actually aid in the economic recovery that we will need. Reducing services to fund rate cuts or a 0 rate increase will actually be detrimental. Be bold and be brave. Support the public transport services. Following the earthquakes in 2010 and 2011, public transport reserves were used to maintain public transport services while not raising rates. This led to a depletion of the public transport funding reserves without actually improving the public transport services. And we're now left in a state where there are almost no public transport reserves, and we're in a similar economic crisis. So again, we need to hold, if not increase, the public transport rate to maintain and increase services. It's a challenge. And I challenge you to be bold, to be brave, to face that challenge, and to maintain and improve services, not reduce. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your submission. I believe we have a question now from Councillor Phil Clearwater.
Well, hi, Mark, and thank you for your submission. Mark, I was interested in your point about ECAN continuing to run public transport. And I just wondered, and you referred though to the other territory authorities being part of that. You can probably guess what I'm going to ask you, but it is. Just have you got a suggestion as to a kind of a model as to how, as a region, and certainly for Greater Christchurch, we might have, I guess, an entity to run transport on a combined basis, and I guess with ECAN at the steering wheel?
Thank you, Councillor. I actually support the Public Transport Joint Committee, which I was a member of. I think councils need to be encouraged to face up to their obligations to fund public transport infrastructure. Christchurch's attempt to form a single entity to do both infrastructure and the public transport services, in my view, is merely an attempt from them to shirk from their responsibilities. And quite frankly, I don't think we should let them away with it. Our users from Selwyn benefit from their public transport infrastructure, but their economy benefits from our public transport users. So they benefit, and they've got to be face up to it and pay for that benefit.
Thanks, mate.
Oh, thank you very much for that question. Then there's another question now from Councillor Southworth.
Hi, thanks, Mark. I'm a fellow bus enthusiast, and I'm a frequent user. And I just wonder, could you maybe give an example of how the frequency issue affects your bus use and choice as to when you can use the bus and when you have to use the car?
For me, I live outside of Rolleston. I can catch the 820 to Rolleston and then the Yellow Line service, or in the mornings the 85 into town. I'll often park and ride at Rolleston simply because the 820 is hourly and it's easier to park and ride, and often I'll combine with other things in Rolleston. From Rolleston to the city, the buses are as good as driving, particularly in the morning. Catching the 85 from the Rolleston Park and Ride is as fast as driving to your car park. So frequency, that could be better. The 820, I was more concerned with the timetabling rather than the frequency. Curtailing the evening services impacts on our youth in particular, who are coming back from Lincoln and Prebbleton using the 80 to Lincoln and the 820 to Rolleston. Cutting the evening services impacts on them more than any other group. And as one of the previous speakers said, we need to be encouraging our youth to use our public transport, not discouraging them, because if we lose them, we encourage them to buy an older, less environmentally sound car, and we'll never get them back to public transport. We should be encouraging our youth to build a habit of public transport, not discouraging them.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree. It's interesting what happens when they get the provisional. Yeah, thank you for that.
Well, I have a son who's got both his driver's license, but he still uses the buses. So if they've developed the habit, they will maintain it. If we discourage them, and the other fare item that I forgot to mention is the absurdity. Halfway through their last year at high school, we double the fare. It's a huge disincentive.
All right, well, thank you very much, Mark, for your submission. And your son could be a poster boy for uses of public transport. So I think that's another thing we could think about. Anyway, I hope everything's good in your bubble, and take care. And you're right, I think about we all have to take different ways coming out of COVID-19. So thank you for taking the time. So we'll move on to our next submitter now, I think, Louise. And that is the Horswell Residents Association. We have, I believe, David Hawke on the line, and is John Bennett there as well. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's David Hawke speaking, and John Bennett is also here. So kia ora tātou, and thanks for the opportunity to present today on behalf of our association in these rather strange circumstances. So I'm the secretary, and John Bennett, who is also in the meeting, is our chairman. So talking to our submission, we want to emphasise 3 points today. So the first of these points is climate change is an overarching rubric to guide ECAN decision making. The second point we want to talk to is the need to boost engagement within our community. And finally, we've got some thoughts on public transport as we emerge from our pandemic. So firstly, climate change. We think that the preface to your annual plan document nicely encapsulates the issues. Our focus as a community and as a country at the moment is on the viral pandemic, but obviously the pandemic will not go on forever. However, the issue of climate change is not going to go away quite so easily. So the changed societal conditions resulting from our response to the pandemic we think present ECAN with both a unique opportunity and a unique challenge across all of ECAN's portfolios. So we reiterate that view of having climate change as an overarching rubric is very well thought through. In terms of boosting engagement, as we point out in our submission, the turnout at the last local body elections wasn't good, and it's actually a rather poor reflection on the state of our democracy. I have to say that we'll be presenting the same message to City Council when we speak to their draft annual plan, but ECAN, we think, has some special challenges that it needs to address. In the first instance, people in our community have at best a very hazy idea of what ECAN does, and we think that ECAN needs to put some thought into how it can better communicate with right across our community, not just ratepayers, but right across our community, what ECAN does. Along the same sort of lines, people don't really know how to engage with ECAN and what they can expect back in the way of a response. And in some respects, you as a council are hampered by the absence of a community board-like structure, and you also have a small number of councillors, which we certainly accept doesn't make the job any easier, but it still needs to be done. On the more positive side, we think that your recent emergence from statutory control gives you as a council and councillors a unique perspective on the importance of local democratic input. Your regional mandate also gives you the opportunity to take a broader view of political engagement, and you don't bring with you the baggage that comes with some of the city council relations with its community. So I guess you've had lots of challenges thrown at you today, so we're going to put in another one for you, and that's to take a leadership role across Canterbury in boosting political engagement. And from our experience, I would have to say, I think that's something that there's a bit of a vacuum for you folk to step into, and we hope that we do. We hope that you do. So finally, some thoughts on public transport. So the lockdowns obviously implemented a reset on the way we get around. In fact, getting around is obviously pretty limited at the moment. So when we emerge from the various levels of lockdown and physical spacing and such like, what are we actually going to do? So one of us was in an international Zoom meeting of active transport activists last week, and they had two messages that we think are really important to you as a council and to public transport. The first message they had is that people across the world are now very open to engaging what we would call intrinsic values. So to us, the first of these intrinsic values is safety, and the second of these intrinsic values is sustainability. So one of the things that ECAN has to do is to be able to counter the message about physical distancing that we have had thrust on us over the last 4 to 6 weeks. The message that was put to us as well is that private vehicle sellers also know this intrinsic values message, and you can expect them to be very much pushing the safety button. And as a council, you need to be able to counter this and to be ready when it comes. Secondly, the more positive intrinsic value is sustainability, and this is where the opportunity lies. Public transport provides a unique opportunity, and we think that ECAN needs to really engage this intrinsic value of sustainability. Your chair's preface in the draft annual plan makes the link, and we think you need to build on it. It's quite hard to do, we totally understand that, but there needs to be a lot of innovative thought about getting people onto public transport. And perhaps one of the things to think about is to ask really carefully the barriers to public transport that have long existed. And as an association, we get two particular barriers that come up time and time and time again. And the first of these is fares. So, like, how about 10 cents a trip? That's a bit of a random suggestion perhaps, but we're just really emphasising that this fares is one barrier that you need to address very, very carefully. And the other, and this is from a, I guess, a viewpoint in Horswell, is there's some of our areas, and I just heard from the gentleman from Rolleston just a few moments ago, is the idea of express routes with minimal intermediate stops. And we do know that coming up in our area and in other parts across the city as well, public transport priority lanes that have been approved, and ECAN needs to be ready to take advantage of those. So those are the 3 points that I wanted to emphasise on our behalf from our submission. So climate change is an overarching rubric, the need to boost engagement with the community, and some thoughts on public transport as we emerge from our pandemic. So thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Well, thank you very much, David, from the Horswell Residents Association. I have a bit of a good feeling towards every residents association, as I do with every community group across Canterbury. It's so good that you're there and that you're taking the time to make such a detailed submission. Councillor Phil Clearwater, have you got a question?
Oh, look, I could. It's actually, thank you, David. In relation to the democracy part you talked about, you referred to City Council having community boards, and clearly there's the link there for the residents associations. I wondered if you might see potential for residents associations like yours to link, say, with the zone committees, which cover a lot of the environmental issues in the different areas.
Yeah, the zone committees are quite interesting, and I'd have to say that, so we've got one of our committee members is actually on one of the zone committees, but I'm not sure that this is, yeah, I guess most of our interest has historically been focused on public transport rather than the more environmentally focused areas. I think people in our community have got a really strong interest in particularly water and water quality, but they don't seem to engage through us as a residents association when they're trying to voice those concerns. I think that perhaps this is part of the difficulty that people have is actually making that connection between themselves as residents through to the role that ECAN has, although John might have something to add in there.
Over to you, John.
Yeah, so he's obviously not picked up on that. So yeah, so that's, I think, where we would come through. Thanks, Councillor Clearwater.
Thanks, David. And can I just briefly thank you and your Residents Association too for your support of the bus lanes, and obviously particularly Horswell and Lincoln Road. That certainly helps will help get the buses through, and that potential for that express lane that you referred to, or express service. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We have a question from Councillor Hands. Over to you, Councillor.
Hi, David. Thank you very much for your submission, and thank you for the work that the Residents Association does. I was interested in your comments around, you said there's a leadership role there for ECAN across Canterbury in boosting political engagement, and in your submission you talk about having a target to boost turnout. We've just established a working group around how we improve engagement with the community around the work that Environment Canterbury does, but I was interested in your comments there and how you might see that we would take on that leadership role. What would that look like to you? And you've talked a little bit about the community board structure and the likes, but if there's any other specific things that you'd like to say there, that would be great.
I think one of the things that, I think this is going to be a multi-level sort of thing, and there's inevitably there's no magic bullet. But one thing that we had in the old days before you had statutory control is that we had one of the ECAN representatives in our area came along to our meeting on not every meeting, but on a regular basis. And so that was actually a forum for the ECAN person, councillor, to hear some community concerns, and it was also an opportunity for them to present those community concerns to our membership. The challenge, of course, is that you're quite a small council, and there's not the opportunity to go and talk willy-nilly to every small community group across the region. But that's certainly one angle on that. I guess another way that, to me, that in terms of boosting engagement is, I think this is an IT issue, is your website is not actually all that easy in terms of navigating its way around. And a good example of that is that there's a resource consent that ECAN notified recently in Marshes Road about a waste processing site. And we had to had at least one of our members come to us and say, well, where do we get the information? And they didn't have the IT skills to find that, and we were certainly able to help out. But that would be another area I think that ECAN could do in terms of boosting its visibility in the community. But it's obviously not an easy task, and City Council with its community board structure is facing exactly the same sort of challenge. But I think that for councillors to be making the most of social media profiling that they can do just to highlight the role that they play. That's another way. I guess one of the real barriers to participation that we see is that many people don't actually understand the electoral system so far as the local body elections have. They really struggle with, at a national level, with MMP, but if you come into a local level, it's completely, I wouldn't say it's a much lower level of understanding as to how that electoral system works. So I think there needs to be some work on that. And the reason that I guess that we talked about having a leadership role is that actually ECAN is the council, it's the regional council, and so it talks right across all of our regions. And so, you know, rather than just Selwyn District going and telling all its residents how the system works in Surrey and Christchurch City doing it, that a role there, I think, or we think, for ECAN with its regional hat on. So unfortunately, no silver bullet, but it's a start.
Thanks very much, David.
Yes, thank you very much, Councillor Hands, for your question, and thank you, David, for your response. I don't see any other questions, are there, Louise, or have I lost track of them?
No, Jenny, that's it.
All right, well, I want to thank you very much, David and John, for coming along. I hope everything's good in both your bubbles, and you're certainly enabling yourselves to participate in democracy, coming along to our hearings, and we really appreciate it. So I think that's the end of our hearings for today. So we'll sign off from you there, and I'll just ask Louise, have we got anything else? Any other people online, or I haven't missed anyone, have I?
No, Jenny, no, that's the last one for this session. We'll be back at 1 o'clock, starting
right.
with Ashburton District Council.
Well, thank you very much. I'd just like to ask Councillor Pauling if he would like to close the meeting with a karakia. Thank you, Craig.
Kia ora, Jenny. I think it's probably best just to leave it open until we finish up at the end of the day.
All right, excellent. We'll do it that way then. So
yeah.
I'll just say thank you very much to everybody, especially our presenters who are still online, and all the staff who've been on here listening, and the people who technically supported our meeting, and especially you, Louise. You've done a fantastic job setting this all up. So did any councillors want to raise anything now, or shall we just sign off? All right, we're all fine. So we'll see you on